welcome to those joining virtually and those who are here in person in the event space. I want to start once again with gratitude. Thank you to Malik for setting up this space and making it so beautiful. Thank you to Susan Brooks, who I think maybe just walked out for a moment, who brought the food this morning. And just a reminder, if you'd like to help contribute to making this class nourishing both in body and mind, then just let Susan know that you'll volunteer to bring snacks for next week. And thank you to Rabbi Jensen for gabaying this morning. So I want to start as we did last week with the bracha, with the blessing for engaging in the act of Torah study. This is a blessing that ends with the words la'asok b'divrei Torah. Please join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to engage in the sacred act of learning together. I learned the following practice from Rabbi Sean Fieldsmeyer, who I think many of you know is a member of our community. And I learned it from her when she was teaching at Ziegler and I was a student in one of her classes. She would begin every session of Torah learning by asking us to dedicate our learning on that particular day to someone who's passed away. And this isn't the practice that she invented. This is a part of our tradition, which understands the act of learning as a way of connecting with loved ones who are no longer with us, and that by invoking their name, by inviting their presence into our Beit Midrash, we seek to connect with their souls and to transfer some delight to their souls and maybe be the recipients of that as well. So I want you to think for a moment, identify if there's someone in your life that you'd like to dedicate today's learning to. I want to dedicate this learning in light of this moment in American history and American politics. I want to dedicate our learning this morning to Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good, Zichronam Livracha, killed by federal forces as they were engaged in protecting the most vulnerable among us. Are there others who want to share to whom you are dedicating your learning today? It can be someone you know, someone you don't know.
Today's International Holocaust Memorial Day. And so all those that have perished in those times that we remember them passed since then because we've lost a lot of survivors.
Thank you, Rabbi Zaki. Rabbi Zaki is dedicating her learning today in commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day to those who were murdered in the Shoah. Thank you. Praise Him.
I would like to dedicate it to my mother, Bela Solo, who grew up Orthodox, but as a woman of her generation, didn't get as much learning as she wanted. So as she was, as an adult, later on, after the 5 kids were older, she participated in Shirin every Shabbat. So.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Bela Solo. Bela Solo. Carrie.
Grandpa Irv. I used to ask him all these questions. I remember taking walks with him after dinner and asking all about the news and all about the news. So he would love this class and love you, so I'm bringing him in.
Grandpa Irv. Thank you, Carrie. All right. So in the spring of 2017, I took a class at rabbinical school with another name that you all are going to recognize, Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Cohen, and he called the class #resistance. This was the spring of 2017. You can identify what's going on in this country. In that class, we looked at various Talmudic texts that explored rabbinic resistance against the oppressive governments that they lived under. It was a phenomenal class, and for those who know him, Dr. Cohen is the perfect teacher to teach that class. A man who walks the walk and talks the talk, and you'll find at pretty much every protest and community organizing event here in LA. And so I'm grateful to him for teaching the Torah that I'm going to try to teach in my own way today. All right, so in order to understand the primary story, which is an Agadah, is a rabbinic story from Berakhot, the same tractate that we looked at last week, but 60 pages later. But in order to understand that story, we need a little bit of legal context. So we're going to start our learning in a different tractate, the Tractate of Sanhedrin, with what is a relatively... It's always funny when rabbis say, this famous rabbinic text, as if a rabbinic text can be that famous. But I would say a foundational rabbinic text that helps us understand the rabbi's relationship to the life and death stakes of the observance of the mitzvot. All right, so here we are on the top of your first page. With regard to all other transgressions in the Torah, if a person is told, transgress this prohibition and you will not be killed, he may transgress that prohibition and not be killed, because the preservation of his own life overrides all of the Torah's prohibitions. This is the halakha, this is the Jewish law, concerning all prohibitions except for those of idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. Concerning those prohibitions, one must allow himself to be killed rather than transgress them. All right, so this is the setup, right? What happens if in a situation of duress, right? If, God forbid, someone is holding a weapon to your head and says, do X or I'll kill you. What are you supposed to do? That's the scenario that the rabbis are imagining in this legal text. And essentially their conclusion is that with the exception of 3 directives, right, that the one who's brandishing the weapon might give you, with the exception of the 3 directives, you should do the thing that they're telling you to do in order to not be killed, right? So if they say, I don't mean to offend anyone here. If they say, eat this bacon, right, or I'll kill you, you eat the bacon, right? If they say, violate Shabbat, if they say, steal something for me, right? Even one of the 10 commandments, disrespect your parents, right? We could go through them. If they say any of those things, you are not just supposed to, you are halachically commanded, right? You are obligated to violate the law in order to save your life. And why? I mean, the basic principle here is an often quoted text from Vayikra, from Leviticus. Ushmartem et chukotai ve'et mishpatai asher ya'aseh otam v'hadam v'chai bahem. Right? You shall observe my commandments that I give to you, and a human should live by them. V'chai bahem. Right? Chai like chayim. You should live by them. And the rabbis interpret that verse from Leviticus to mean these mitzvot are supposed to give us life, right? Literally and metaphorically. The commandments are supposed to be a mechanism by which our life is made meaningful, our life is expanded, our life is brought into higher purpose. Observance of the mitzvot is not supposed to do the opposite, right? And there are 3 exceptions that the rabbis list here. Idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. If, God forbid, you are in a scenario in which someone is holding that weapon against you and says, kill someone else or I'll kill you, you are actually supposed to die in that moment. Right? You're not supposed to do that act in order to save your life. Now, as you probably could guess, just based on the 2 months of Talmud learning that we've done thus far, what's then going to follow is a whole bunch of discussion and debate about, well, what exactly happens in this scenario? What if it's really an act of self-defense, or, is such and such really idol worship, or is it just something that's offensive to God? I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I will say this passage from the Gemara is tremendously consequential in the centuries of Jewish history in which forced conversion was the primary strategy of either the Christian or Muslim empires. Right? Think about the Inquisition. Think about the time of Maimonides, right? Who fled from one place to the next, trying to escape the sword or conversion, right? And so you don't have rabbinic consensus on what exactly counts as idol worship or what exactly counts as bloodshed. So know that this is something that's highly contested because writ large, I think what I would say is that Judaism is not a religion that emphasizes martyrdom. We have martyrdom. We're going to learn today a story of martyrdom, but it isn't a celebrated religious tradition like it is to the extent that it is in other traditions. All right, so there's obviously a lot more to say about this topic, but again, this is the halachic backdrop in order to understand the story that's going to come next. Rabbi Zaki, in just 1 second, Malik's going to come over with the microphone.
Oh, yes, thank you. This is important.
Okay, I believe you.
So, that one line of forbidden sexual relations.
Yes,
Really
yeah.
irks me because things that the text allows irks me, and this, especially in the case of love, it needs to be rethought.
Yes. Rabbi Zaki, I completely agree with you, right? So you might have noticed when I was giving examples, I fleshed out bloodshed and I fleshed out idol worship, and I didn't flesh out this one because of a shared discomfort with the implications. The prohibited sexual relations, according to the rabbis of the Talmud, span engaging in sexual relations with an animal, incest, sexual relations with a parent, but also, unfortunately, include same-sex relations, which our community proudly accepts as an expression of love and expression of divine love. So in that, I would not apply that to this definition here. Okay. All right, so let's move to this second text. Is it listed as the second text in your, yes? Okay, all right, the continuation of the text. So this comes immediately after. Okay, when Rav Dimi came from Israel to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, the sages taught that one is permitted to transgress prohibitions in the face of mortal danger only when it is not a time of religious persecution. But in a time of religious persecution, when the Gentile authorities are trying to force Jews to violate their religion, even if they issued a decree about a minor mitzvah, one must be killed and not transgress. Right? So just for a moment, we're going to break this down further after we read the next paragraph, but just so that we understand the headline. The stakes change with respect to the halachic principle that we were just introduced to about when you can transgress in order to not be killed versus when you cannot. The stakes change bisha'at hashmad, in a time of religious persecution. Right? In that context, the rabbis seem to be, or at least Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, seem to be much stricter about what you are allowed to transgress. Meaning, Rav Dimi and Rabbi Yochanan seem to be advocating for what I'll call a sort of lower threshold of martyrdom. Right? One should not transgress even a minor mitzvah. Right? One should accept death as one's fate, even if you are asked to violate only a minor mitzvah, if it's in a time of religious persecution. Okay, so just hold on to that for a moment. Let's read the next paragraph, and then we'll try to break down what's happening here. When Ravin came from Israel to Babylonia, notice that both of these are set up the same way, with rabbis who are moving from the land of Israel to Babylonia, right? The land of Israel being the place where this religious persecution was primarily enacted and imagined. He says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, even when it is not a time of religious persecution, the sages said that one is permitted to transgress a prohibition in the face of mortal danger only when he was ordered to do so in private. But if he was ordered to commit a transgression in public, even transgressing a minor mitzvah, he must be killed and not transgress. The Gemara asks, what is a minor mitzvah for this purpose? Rava Bar Yitzchak says that Rav says, the Gemara is so strange, even to change the strap of a sandal. The Gemara asks, and the presence of how many people is required so that it should be deemed a public act? Rabbi Yaakov says that Rabbi Yochanan says an action is not considered a public act if it is performed in the presence of fewer than 10 people. Okay, so in this second text, we're introduced to a new distinction that raises the stakes or changes the calculus of when one ought to transgress, even at the consequence of one's own death, right? It adds the dimension of public versus private. And then the Gemara asks two clarifying questions about the new rule that's just been suggested. One is to clarify, well, what do we mean by a minor mitzvah? And that's where we get even to change the strap of a sandal. I did a little bit of research on this because I was completely confused by that as an example. I'm running through my head the catalog of commandments and trying to think, is there anything in there about footwear? And not that I'm aware of. So this is apparently a custom, which is also interesting, right? A minhag, a custom, does not have the same legal status, does not have the same force of obligation as a mitzvah, but that is nonetheless what is being listed here as a minor mitzvah. And apparently there was a Jewish custom with regard to the manner in which one strapped one's sandals, right? By this, I think it means like how you tie your sandal, right? Not, I don't know, Velcro or no Velcro, or the very controversial issue in my house, which is, are you allowed to wear socks with your sandals? Yes or no, the rest of the world. Okay, so I think it seems to be with, if you're wrapping leather straps around your sandal, there was a particular style that indicated a Jewish style of doing so. It was considered Jewish garb versus a style which was non-Jewish garb. And so this seems to connect to the mitzvah that one should, which is I think also a controversial mitzvah, which is that one should not emulate the customs of non-Jews, which is why you see in some Jewish communities a distinctive dress, which is attempting to not blend in with the style of dress of the rest of the populace. What's ironic is that that was just the style of dress common in Eastern Europe in the 17th century, but that's a class for a different day. So anyway, that's what's being listed here as a minor mitzvah. One is obligated to give up their life rather than strap your sandal in the way that a non-Jew would strap their sandal. And then the second clarifying point here, I think is interesting in light of what we learned last week, right? When we saw in one of the sources at the end of our class last week, right? When the rabbis are establishing the centrality of prayer and synagogue and gathering as a community as the way to meet the divine. And if you recall, what we learned was, she'asara mitpalalin, when 10 gather, shechina imahem, God is with them, right? So this is the proof text for a minyan. So what constitutes a public act? Maybe smaller than you would have imagined, right? If there's 10 in the room, that is categorized as a public act, which once again raises the stakes. Okay, let's pause here and hear some reactions to the ways in which this text, this rule, is being modified to consider times of religious persecution and to consider the difference between a public act versus a private act. Keith.
I'll just say that I think this addresses an issue we all know has been important in recent times, which is the normalization of, policies and acts that may be very small, but constitute a slippery slope in a direction we don't like. So this says you've got to resist at every micro event.
Well said, Keith. Well said. Thank you. Others? Jody, just 1 second. Malik will make his way over. Thank you, Malik.
Thank you. I think I would add to that sometimes it's important to do things in public and transgress in public. Just looking at Minneapolis right now and standing up to tyranny and, putting their lives, in the line of danger. And then in this circumstances that, with all the filming and stuff, it informs the rest of the public as to how bad things really can get,
Good.
So.
Yeah. Right. So combining Keith and Jody's answers, I think we're hitting on what might be in the mind of the rabbis here. Right. That first of all, a minor mitzvah. This might be the testing ground, right, for the authorities. If we can get away with X, next we'll get away with Y, next we'll get away with Z, and before you know it, the situation has radically changed. And what used to be the freedom enjoyed in the public square or the freedom of religious liberty is no longer there anymore. So be attentive to even what seems like the small acts and resist at every small place. And there are eyes on the public square in ways which are different than eyes in the private domain. And so the implications of assenting to tyrannical decrees or to a violation of liberty in the public square has a big ripple effect. Please.
So my grandfather was Sephardic, and so when we're reading this, it's like, wait a minute, that would have led to the annihilation of all those people if there had not been some sort of commentary that allowed them to not protest. And I'm curious about that.
Right. So, Lisa is, I think, naming what's one of the central tensions of the text, and even of the very first text, right? Which in some ways sort of questions the whole enterprise of martyrdom, right? L'shem Shemaim, Kiddush Hashem, is sanctification. When is it actually worth it to die for God, to die for religious freedom? And isn't there merit in living to fight another day? And if we take these rules too strictly, how many lives will be lost when maybe the path to freedom could be achieved a different way? And I think it's actually Lisa's concern, it's your concern that produces a lot of rabbinic leniency when interpreting these texts. I would say more times than not, the rabbis will find a way to permit the transgression rather than to say you need to die rather than transgress. Okay, so I wanna move on because, as I said, this is all the setup of the actual Talmudic story that we're going to look at today. But by way of transition, do you notice I put in italics one of the Aramaic words in the last text? That the word for public, which in Aramaic is farhesia. Farhesia. Does anyone recognize that word? What if I said parhesia? Oh, that didn't help. Okay. So I didn't know this either. Thank you to Dr. Cohen for pointing this connection out and then for sharing with us the scholarship around this particular cognate. So we're going to read a short blurb from Michel Foucault's Discourse and Truth, the problematization of parhesia. Foucault, I associate Foucault with grad school and only grad school, but 20th century French philosopher, political activist, literary critic. He wrote a lot about the intersections of power structures and freedom, and this is part of 6 essays that he delivered specifically on the topic of parhesia. So let's go into the world of Foucault. The word parhesia appears for the first time in Greek literature in Euripides and occurs throughout the ancient Greek world of letters from the end of the 5th century BC. But it can also be found in the patristic texts written at the end of the 4th and during the 5th century AD, which is all to say this word, this concept, is being explored in Greco-Roman literature, simultaneous to the development of the Mishnah and the first few centuries of the development of the Talmud. Okay, so and remember, right, the rabbis first living in the land of Israel are living eventually under Roman rule, right? And the Greco-Roman Empire is one of the dominant cultural forces in the time that the rabbis are writing. Okay, now what is parhesia? Parhesia is a verbal activity in which a speaker expresses his personal relationship to truth and risks his life because he recognizes truth-telling as a duty to improve or help other people as well as himself. In parhesia, the speaker uses his freedom and chooses frankness instead of persuasion, truth instead of falsehood or silence, the risk of death instead of life and security, criticism instead of flattery and moral duty instead of self-interest and moral apathy. Those words should jump off the page. Jump off the page as we think about this moment. When a philosopher addresses himself to a sovereign, to a tyrant, and tells him that his tyranny is disturbing and unpleasant because tyranny is incompatible with justice, then the philosopher speaks the truth, believes he is speaking the truth, and more than that, also takes a risk, since the tyrant may become angry, may punish him, may exile him, may kill him. When you accept the parrhesiastic game in which your own life is exposed, you are taking up a specific relationship to yourself. You risk death to tell the truth instead of reposing in the security of a life where the truth goes unspoken. Okay, so parhesia, right, which you'll find expressed in the works of Plato and Socrates and other, Greek classics, is the verbal discourse, which necessarily includes a power imbalance, right? It is a truth-telling activity done by the one with less power, right? Because the moment demands this kind of truth-telling, because the speaker feels a duty to themselves and to their broader society to literally speak truth to power, to call out what is happening, and does so at great risk to their own safety. This could be done through verbal expression, through the written word, through showing up on the streets, through the use of a cell phone video camera, through the documenting of what happened, of what we see is happening, as opposed to believing falsified accounts of what happened. Right? And it comes with tremendous risk. We're going to now look at something that Dr. Cohen wrote that is going to begin to puzzle together both what we now know about parhesia from Foucault and what we've seen in the Sanhedrin text and what we're about to see in the story from Berakhot. And he's going to quote another great rabbi and teacher, Rabbi Dr. Julia Watts-Belser, in her book, Power, Ethics, and Ecology in Jewish Late Antiquity, points out that the Greek parhesia, in its rabbinic cognate, pharhesia, right, that's the word we just saw in the Sanhedrin text about transgressing a mitzvah in public, centers on the social location of parhesia, characterizing instead the public nature of a particular act or event. Rabbinic sources rarely speak of parhesia as a mode of discourse, but a locus of discourse or action. This move to public space as the point of tension is not surprising. In the Eastern Empire, public spaces, roads, boundary markers, city plans were the privilege and prerogative of the imperial government. Moreover, this is where people interface with government. This is brought home in one of the most famous stories which took place in and contested the public space. In this story, the term pharhesia does not appear, but I, Dr. Cohen, would suggest that the public domain in the story, which is the story of resistance against an evil government who issues a decree, brings us right back to the pharhesia of Sanhedrin 74a. Okay, so to just recap, the rabbinic use of farhesia, it's a term that appears over 100 times in the Babylonian Talmud, is mostly used to denote space, public space. But Dr. Cohen and Julia Watts-Belzer are suggesting that we read this word not just as public, but also containing what we read as Foucault's definition of parhesia, right? It's a particular kind of truth-telling activity that puts the speaker at risk, but the speaker feels a sense of duty to do so, that happens in the public domain, challenging the authority with more power. Okay, that's how we're to understand farhesia in the Talmud. We're not going to see the word farhesia in the story we are about to read. Instead, it'll use a related term. It'll use the term of rabbim, right, in public. But Dr. Cohen is suggesting that we apply everything that we know about farhesia, everything we know about what happens in a time of religious persecution and what mitzvot we are supposed to what mitzvot we're supposed to die for. We should apply all of that to the story we're about to read. Okay? Are we on the same page? I know I walked you through two sort of dense academic texts, but with that, we are now prepared to go to Berakhot 61b. Yes, Stuart.
Just a small comment. When I was thinking about public space, there are really two roles of public. There's the imperial public space in view of the oppressor.
Yeah.
But there's also the public space in view of your own community. And standing up in your own community to model something, as well as being a visible act of resistance to the oppressor, are two different roles that two powerful roles, but distinct roles of the public space.
I completely agree, right? So the public space as a site of resistance, right, is a way, and we'll see this, I think, borne out in the text, is a way to reclaim the public space from being a site of control of the oppressor to a site of communal control, right? Think about it. Regardless of the content of the protest, a very common chant at protests, whose streets? Our streets. Right? It is a reclamation of what is being claimed by the oppressor as their domain to the domain of the people. Okay? All right. Shall we?
I just want to say there's a chant, and I just saw it on TV in some other context. It was a fiction, but it goes like this: "Community united will never be defeated." And that chant, I was in a teacher strike. That was the name chant, and you hear it all over the world.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Keith.
This has to do with not just saying things in a public space, but inspiring community action.
That's right. So what are the implications of resistance in a public space vis-a-vis the way that it inspires more participation in that resistance or more resistance to the oppressive regime? Yep. Okay. I want to flag right now that the text we're about to learn really has two parts to it. We might not get to the second part, which is okay. I think the second part in some ways is distinct from the first part, but the second part is really provocative. So if you are the kind of student that reads ahead and is feeling really bothered by what comes, you might leave this class continuing to feel bothered, and I don't know if we're going to return to this next week. We'll see. We'll see what we get to, but we're going to emphasize the first part of the text because that's really the part that connects most to what we've been discussing thus far. But I couldn't include this text without putting the second part on the source sheet because it's well known for other reasons. Okay, Berakhot 61b. You'll recall from our class last week that the opening question of the Talmud has to do with the timing of the recitation of the evening Shema, right? How early can you say it, and until what time in the morning can you say it? We are 60 pages later in the Talmud, and we are still talking about the Shema, okay? So now you know where long-winded rabbinic teaching comes from. All right, here we go. We learned in our Mishnah the explanation of the verse, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Rabbi Akiva says, with all your soul means even if God takes your soul. Let me just pause for a moment. What's happening here is the rabbis are debating, what do each of these three terms mean? What's the difference between loving God with your heart versus loving God with your soul versus loving God with your might? How are they different? How are they similar? I didn't include all the explanations. I just included Rabbi Akiva's because he's now the protagonist of the story that comes next. But his interpretation is kind of an extreme one, if I can say. Right? What does it mean to love God with your soul? It means to love God even if God takes your soul. Right? So that could either be understood even in the moment of death. You continue to love God, which is a hard thing to say, depending on the circumstances of death, of course. Or it could mean, I think this is a softer interpretation, that you love God with the knowledge that our time here is finite, right? With the knowledge that, Adonai Natan va'Adonai Lakach, God gives and God takes, okay? All right. The sages taught, one time, the evil empire of Rome, now you know where Star Wars gets it from, the evil empire of Rome decreed that Israel may not engage in the study and practice of Torah. Pappus ben Yehuda came and found Rabbi Akiva, who was convening assemblies in public and engaging in Torah study. So the word farhesia is not used here, but I want you to imagine, right, everything that we learned about farhesia is applying in this moment. Okay? Rabbi Akiva is openly defying the decree of the Roman Empire by teaching Torah, which is prohibited, in the public square, in a time of religious persecution. Pappus said to him, Akiva, are you not afraid of the empire? Rabbi Akiva answered him, I will relate a parable. To what can this be compared? It is like a fox walking along a riverbank when he sees fish moving in swarms from place to place. The fox said to them, from what are you fleeing? They said to him, we are fleeing from the nets that people cast upon us. He said to them, do you wish to come up onto dry land? And we will reside together, just as my ancestors resided with your ancestors. Interesting insight into evolution, pretty early on here, right? The fish said to him, yeah, right, backwards evolution, you're right. The fish said to him, are you the one they call the cleverest of animals? You are not clever, but foolish. If we are afraid in the water, our natural habitat which gives us life, then in a habitat that causes our death, all the more so. And now there's the mashal, the parable, and then the nimshal, the moral of the parable. So it is with us. If such is our condition when we sit and study the Torah, of which it is written, for that is your life and the length of your days, if we treat Torah as worthless, how much worse off shall we be? The sages said, not a few days passed until they seized Rabbi Akiva and incarcerated him in prison, and seized Pappus ben Yehuda and incarcerated him alongside him. Rabbi Akiva said to him, Pappus, who brought you here? Pappus replied, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, for you were arrested on the charge of engaging in Torah study. Oi lo le Pappus, woe unto Pappus, who was seized on the charge of busying himself with worthless matters. Wow, right? Okay. Let me try to expand just the historical context of the moment, and then I want to spend a fair amount of time trying to, as a group, unpack this parable, understand what's happening, and then think about it in the context of farhesia, think about it in the context of resistance to tyranny in the public square.
Who sees Pappus?
Who sees him? Who seized him? Seized. Who seized him? Who captures him? Who incarcerates him? The Roman Empire. Yeah, the Roman Empire, the Roman authorities. I think that's the implication of the text. Okay. So I think, as already said, but let me just make it clear, right? The evil kingdom in this text refers to Roman rule in the land of Israel. Right? Akiva is a sage who lives basically from the year 50 to about 132, 135. Destruction of the temple is in the year 70. The Bar Kokhba revolt, which is understood as kind of the last effort of the Jews in the land of Israel to fight back against Roman occupation and rule, is squashed around the time of Rabbi Akiva's death. Scholars, so what you will learn next, if we get to it, is that the very next scene in this passage is the tale of Akiva's execution by the Romans. So this story seemingly happens right around the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. It could be during the revolt, or it could be right after the revolt. What we know from academic literature is that there was something called the Hadrianic Bands, right? Hadrian being the Roman ruler of this part of Judea, of the land of Israel. And these were restrictive Roman policies aimed at suppressing Jewish identity and religion. The one that we have seen corroborated and in external, i.e. non-Jewish sources, is the prohibition banning circumcision. But we see in Jewish sources engaging in Torah study, teaching Torah, and even just generally observing mitzvot is understood to be part of the Hadrianic bands. Okay, so when we read at the very beginning of this passage that the empire decreed that Israel may not engage in the study and practice of Torah, understand that to mean engaging in the study of Torah, in the practice of Torah, in circumcision, in Jewish life, right? In meaningful Jewish life. That is what's being prohibited. So Akiva's decision to teach Torah in public, right, is what we call dafka, right? It's I would say intentionally provocative, right? And I should note, right, that the ban on studying or practicing, engaging in Torah, Akiva would have been within the halachic permissibility structure to have done this in private, right? Everything that we read, right, asks us about the scenario if you have to do something in public or if you have to do something in time of religious persecution, can you do it or transgress? Can you not do it? Right? It seems like Akiva could have taught Torah in private. He didn't have to do what he did. He didn't have to endanger himself, which I think shows that he's making a point here. And the reason I say that he could have done this in private is that we have all sorts of other stories which mention the rabbis doing this in private. Think about, this might be a part of the Haggadah that people skip, but one of the opening passages in the section of Magid tells the story of 5 rabbis who are in Bnei Brak, and they're discussing Torah, and it says, "Masters, the time has come for the morning Shema." Does that ring a bell? Right? So likely what these rabbis are doing is hiding out, engaging in Torah study as to not be caught by Roman authorities, and they have a guard who's standing by, who's going to tell them, what time it is, because they can't see because they're in a cave learning. The game of dreidel, right? This is now under an earlier era of religious persecution. The whole game of dreidel is the cover so that if authorities were to discover Jews gathered, they would catch them playing a game when in reality what they were doing was studying Torah. Okay, all of that is to say, Akiva is doing something intentionally provocative that he knows is banned, that he could have done in private. He would have had halachic permission to do in private, but he's instead doing in public. Let's break down the parable. Who are the fish? Who's the fox? Who are the fishermen? What do you think? And what are the nets? And what are the nets, right? The fishermen are the ones who are are casting the nets. Who are the fish? Who is the fox? Who are the fishermen? What do you think? No wrong answers. Just answers that agree with scholarly interpretation and those that don't. Sorry?
Jews the fish, all of us who are trying to obviously pray and feel less comfortable on land without our prayers than in water with our land.
Good. All the scholars agree that the Jews are the fish, right? The Jews are the fish, right? And our natural habitat, right, is water. The natural habitat of fish is water. And then the analogy is Torah, right? Torah is our water, right? A fish out of water is a fish that cannot survive. A Jew separated from Torah, whether that's study of Torah, a life of performing the mitzvot, is a Jew who cannot survive. Torah is our water. Who's the fox? Okay, so can you substantiate? So a leading theory is that the fox is Rome. And so why do we think it's Rome? Good, right? So Rome is trying to convince, right? So the fox is cunning, right? And not just in Talmudic literature, of course, right? This is a motif in lots of folk stories, right? The fox is cunning. The fox is trying to persuade the Jews in the water, the fish, to come onto land. But we all know that they won't survive there, right? So Rome is saying, give up your Torah study, give up your life as Jews, join the empire, and either there you'll assimilate or there will destroy you, right? Marshall, let's go over here. It's good, the dramatic pause.
Hope I don't forget.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I would say the fox is Rome, because it's Panitz, if I'm pronouncing it correctly,
Yeah.
who's making the offer. So it's more, the fox is the illusion of safety.
The fox is the illusion of safety. So Marshall, right, you used your close textual reading skills, right, and notice that maybe Papoose is the fox, right? Maybe Papoose is the one who's, maybe not as overtly as the fox is doing it in the parable, but Papoose is the one who's challenging Akiva a little bit. Why are you doing this, Akiva? Why are you teaching Torah in the public square, right? Now, Papoose is a Jew. Papoose ben Yehuda. There's a lot of debate about who exactly he is. I'm not going to get into that right now. But he actually seems to be a respected rabbi and a colleague of Akiva. But maybe Papoose has a different theory of survival in this moment than Akiva does, right? Maybe Papoose is saying, keep your head down, Akiva. Maybe we have to find the midway point between Jews in our natural habitat and a Jewish community that can assimilate, acculturate, stand side by side, come onto dry land, coexist, right, with the broader society, with the Roman Empire, right? But then, right, at the very end of the story, maybe Papoose / the fox realizes the error of their ways. Go ahead, Marshall. And then Razel.
And also the fact that he calls him a fool. Going back to the earlier part, too, there is this wonderful tension between Israel and Babylonia. And which the Sanhedrin decree doesn't talk about in Israel there are different sets of rules.
Yeah.
And it's easy, we were just the tension about your ancestors, that there's, when you are, it's easy for Israel to decree how to live outside of Israel. And I think that's a tension that continues to this day. And it's the tension that's continuing the story.
Israel's offering one high set of principles, but wait, what do you guys know? This is the reality we have to deal with.
Right.
And I think that continues throughout all of this.
Yeah. Well, and there's a whole other dynamic here of what does this teaching mean in Babylonia versus what does it mean in Israel? What does it mean in the 1st and 2nd century, in the height of Roman religious persecution and in the height of Jewish life in the land of Israel, right? Versus in Babylonia, where the Jews are, of course, a minority culture, but more or less are living in political harmony with Babylonian authorities. Right? So is there a different message based on the chronology and the geography of this teaching? We should bring David Kramer back and ask him that question. Razel.
Perhaps a less generous interpretation of Papa's, instead of let's have an alternative to how to survive, would be fear.
Yeah.
Lack of courage.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's one thing Akiva has, it's courage.
Yeah.
And relevant to today, I was just reading a friend's article about how she's protested over the years, against injustice, but at her age, she was afraid to go to protests again in terms of Minnesota, whatever. And she was ashamed to be afraid, but she was afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think fear is a very important thing that's going on here in terms of people showing up for resistance or not.
Yeah.
So even though the final line about Papa's was a fool is not maybe consistent with that, I think we have to think about that possibility.
Yeah. Now, by the way, Pappus ends up incarcerated. Right? And we don't know why. Right? The language that we have in the Gemara is that Pappus says, right, about himself, woe unto Pappus, who was seized on the charge of shenitpas al dvarim betelim, on worthless matters. And I'll just show you because there's a little bit of a linguistic play happening here. I think I bolded it in your text, but only in the Hebrew. If you go up further in that paragraph, Akiva says when he's drawing out the moral of the parable, if we treat Torah as worthless, im anu hochim umivatlim mimena, alachat kama v'kama. How much worse off will we be? So Pappus uses the same word, worthless, to describe what he is doing, as Akiva uses to describe, right, if we disregard the Torah, right? But there's something I want to bring us back to Keith's comment earlier, right? About minor acts versus major acts and the slippery slope. Pappus is not safe. Pappus might think that he'll get by keeping his head ducked. Right? He's not going to engage in the public study of Torah. He's not going to convene crowds to protest against the decrees of the empire, and he'll be a quiet Jew who tries to strike the right balance between resistance and acquiescence. And what ends up happening to Pappus? He ends up in the same place with the same fate as Akiva. Melissa.
And this is sort of the opposite of maybe where we're supposed to be going, but like one could look at this and say, well, they both ended up in the same place, so why bother sticking your necks out? And why, maybe we don't need Torah that much, or maybe Torah doesn't help because we're going to all end up in the same place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair read. I think the statement put into the mouth of Pappus at the very end, where he recognizes, right, the merit of Akiva's actions versus the frivolity of his own, maybe challenges that read, that Pappus realizes if we're going to both end up here, we should fight. We should double down on our identity, not shrink from it. Jeff.
On his leaders and his followers.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Akiva may be a leader in public. He may be in demonstrations. Pappus may be writing letters out of his house.
Right.
So I think there's a difference between making a public statement and not. And second of all, who's defining a worthless matter? Is it the Romans that arrested him? Is it he himself who said that he was a
Pappus says that about his own arrest. So we don't know what leads to Pappus's arrest, but we know that Pappus's own understanding of his arrest is that he was seized for doing something that he didn't think was of the same importance or maybe significance in the resistance as what Akiva was doing. But Jeff, I agree with you, right? I don't mean to imply here that the only path of resistance is convening, crowds in public and teaching Torah, right? There are leaders and there are followers. There are loud acts of resistance. There are quiet acts of resistance, right? There are ones who will document or the ones who will speak, right? It is all needed. I agree with you on that point. So I want to, because I'm mindful of time, want to ask you to now try to connect some of the dots, okay? How do we understand Rabbi Akiva's actions in the context of Farhesia, of Foucault's understanding of Farhesia? In what way is Akiva manifesting Farhesia? And if I may, what can we learn from that as we think about resisting tyranny in the public square today? Small question with 3 minutes left. Razel.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, when I was growing up as an Orthodox Jew, the story that follows is one that inspired me even as a child, although it scared me, which is that at the moment when the Romans punish him and are putting him to the fire, Akiva sings out the Shema.
Yeah.
And when questioned by his students, why are you doing this? It's because this is how I show how I love God with all my heart, soul.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the quintessential story.
Right. Thank you, Razel. Carrie.
I'm just seeing there's truth that Akiva is saying, and then I kind of feel like Pappus is sort of like believing the lies as if it was modern day. You know what I mean? Like, if you tell me this is cool, I'll be cool. Okay, if I do this, but either way, you're still believing the fox, so to speak. So you're kind of being led down lies. So the only way to blow out the lies would be the truth. So it becomes very sort of
Yeah. Right. If Pappus is the fox, right, and the fox ends up in jail as well, right, then the tactics of the empire go beyond nets in the water. Right? The tactics of the empire include sweeping up people on the streets. Right?
The fox is like Fox News.
The expression "hamevin yavin." Those who understand, understand. You get it, right? If you know, you know. Yes. Let's take one more comment. Did I see one more hand? Jody, yeah.
So he was arrested for the actions he was taking. He was involved in that action, whereas Pappus was spending his time questioning that action.
Mm-hmm.
In this, I think, and then not involved with, I'm not exactly sure, but just questioning that when perhaps a better sort of thing of his time could have been to also act.
Yeah.
And there are different ways of acting. You don't have to
Yep.
necessarily be on the street. You can be supporting, you can be coming up with ideas.
Yep.
But he wasn't doing any of that. He was just questioning the actions of the people.
Right. And back to Keith's point earlier, Akiva's action inspires others to action. Right? It doesn't seem to be the case with Pappus, right? I wanna close by giving Dr. Cohen the last word. About this story, he writes, "This is a rabbinic theory." Sorry, this is not on your page. This is a rabbinic theory of political resistance. The space of the action is part of the action. The resistance, though it take the form of symbolic action, is about the Farhesia. The locus of the protest is the place of the interface between the government and the people. So when we go to the streets, when we go to City Hall, when we go to the communities where people feel afraid to leave their homes, and we protest in those spaces, we communicate that this space does not belong to you, the government. This space does not belong to masked federal agents. This space belongs to us. And I want to say, to take it one step further, it's not just a reclamation of space, it's a reclamation of people. These people are not domestic terrorists. These people are not criminals. These people are not rapists. These people are our neighbors. These people are immigrants, just like we might have been one generation ago, or 2 generations ago, or this generation. And I'll take it one step further. It's not just a reclamation of space and a reclamation of people, it's a reclamation of ideology, right? Of truth. This is a truth-telling parhesia, a truth-telling duty, right? That is incumbent on all of us in this moment to reclaim the idea of this country, the idea of freedom, the idea of human dignity for all of us in this moment. Shkoach, thank you all so much. We're going to conclude with Kaddish de Rabbanan. If anyone is saying Kaddish for a loved one, I'll invite you to say their name right now out loud. Please. Bob Cooperman. Zichrono livracha. Kaddish de Rabbanan. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'amad divrach hirutei v'amlich malchutei b'chayechon u'vyomechon ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב ויאמרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבא מבורך לעולם עולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ויאמרו, אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידיהון, ועל כל תלמידי הון, ועל כל מן דעסקין באורייתא, דיב יתרה הדין ודיב וכל אתר ואתר. יהי להון ולכון שלום הרבה חינה וחיסתא ורחמין, וחיין אריכין ומזונה רווחה, ופורקנה מן קדם ובהון דבישמיא ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיא וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ויאמרו amen. Amen. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.